Here are 5 tips, 2 basic ones and 3 pro tips that will speed up your gear shifting. The first and easiest adjustment to make is to the indexing. So if your gears are slow to shift either up or down, it might be that your bike is simply not indexed correctly. So to change that, there's a little barrel adjuster on the back of the derailleur. If you turn it anti-clockwise, you will speed up shifts going inboard, so into easier gears. And if you turn it clockwise, you will speed up shifts going into harder gears. Now, it is a little bit more complicated than that, but that is the essence of it. You don't have to turn it much, just by a quarter of a turn at a time, and that should work. However, it does rely on the other parts of the shifting system being in good working order. The perfect shifting setup is the one where there is the smallest amount of loss in the system between the input at your fingertips and the movement of the rear derailleur. So in a mechanical system like that, any loss is going to come from friction in all likelihood in the cables. So when cables get old, they get worn, then so too the friction increases. And that will mean that your rear derailleur simply doesn't respond as quickly, particularly when you're shifting into harder gears. So give your shifting a bit of a spruce up and change your cables. In all likelihood, it is going to speed things up. So now we can get on to some more pro tips. When you're changing your cables, it's a great opportunity to think about the cable routing. So in theory, the perfect cable routing would be the shortest one between the shifter and the derailleurs. So the longer the cable, the more it can stretch, and then the more time the cable spends in the housing, in the cable outer, then the more friction it's going to generate. However, you can make the cable housing too short. When you do that, you'll either impede the steering, which is a bad thing, or for your shifting, it's even worse if the cable is forced to bend too tightly. That generates loads of friction. So a good example is this bike, which has been set up really rather nicely. You can see the outer at the rear derailleur is in the tightest possible arc without bending too tightly, and at the front, all the cables are super neat. So there's nothing excess, but it's not too short. Pay close attention when you're actually cutting your cable outers as well, because the way you do it can significantly reduce the amount of friction they generate and therefore speed up your shifting. So you always need to use a good set of cable cutters, and then you'll find that no matter how well you do it, there will always be a slight squashing of the end. So give it a squeeze in a different direction to make it round again, and then you can also take a pick and prise open very gently the PTFE inner sheath, and that'll mean that the cable can move much more freely in and out. Then you may find, if you haven't got a good enough cut, or particularly with brake cables, where you always end up with a random bit of metal, that actually if you file the end down very gently, you end up with a perfect finish. Our next friction busting tip when we're replacing our new cables is to look at the type of ferrule that we're using. So that's the generally plastic bit that fits over the end of the cable outer and allows it to sit securely in the cable stops on the frame. So you see, some ferrules are sealed, which is great, except that for every seal on your cable, that is also increasing the drag. So for the very fastest shifting, you want to choose ferrules that are not sealed. So like this one. And then to speed it up even more, hang on a sec, it's stuck, there we go. To speed it up even more, you can take your pick and just ever so slightly enlarge the hole so that the cable is definitely not going to come into contact with any bit of plastic. To lube or not to lube, that is the question. And believe it or not, that is actually a genuine question when it comes to fitting new cables. So you see, greased cables actually increase the friction of the system. So you might want to assemble them completely dry. Now, admittedly, that does have a knock-on effect in that a dry cable is one that is going to be really quite sensitive to the elements, and especially if you've got ferrules that are not sealed as well. So this may be something that you only do for race day, or if you're lucky enough to live in a really dry climate and you don't ride in the rain. If you ride in temperate climates, then you should probably think about greasing your cables. It'll increase the friction short term, but it should mean that they last longer. And same with using sealed ferrules. In fact, you could go the whole way and buy a fully sealed cable system like the ones that you can get from SRAM. They will keep your cables running much smoother for longer, particularly if you ride in really nasty conditions. The secret to fast shifting then lies mainly in your cables. Put new ones in, and when you're assembling them, pay really close attention. Now, indexing as well was how we started the video off, and it can be a slightly daunting task. So if you want to see in-depth videos on that subject, then if you click just up there, then you get through to one about rear shifting, indexing, or click just down there, and you get through to one about indexing your front derailleur. Do make sure you subscribe to GCN before going to either of those though. To do that, just click on the globe. That'll be on this screen somewhere.